Greetings YouTube, Remarkable Republican here once again to bring you the truth with truth-flavored bias. Tonight is part 5 of my series on privatizing the military. We're focusing on military leadership. This is the final aspect of privatizing the military, and this will be what really completes my case as to how and why we should privatize the military. After this video, you shouldn't have any real questions about how this will all work, but if you do, feel free to ask me. I'd be more than happy to engage and to further explain why all of this is such a good idea. I've been researching this all summer, and I am 100% confident in my findings. So let's go ahead and look at military leadership. In part 3, I mentioned that most of the standing units in the government army will be cashiered, and that means that a lot of officers will be losing their jobs. However, I'm going to be keeping around quite a few officers. The officers who are going to stay in service are the ones who graduated from the military academies like West Point. People who became officers by other means will be sent back to the civilian sector, but of course they will be free to re-enter service through the private system. And of course, of the remaining professionals who went to West Point and the academies, some of them will serve in standing units like the 1st Infantry Division. For the others who are not in that unit, they will be in a pool of free officers. And how this will work is that when contractors take up contracts to form units, they will then select officers out of this pool to fill a certain number of roles that we'll discuss. Officers who are selected by a contractor will get double the base pay of their set rank as it's currently determined. However, free officers who are not selected and have to sit out a campaign season will be on half pay, and they'll spend their time writing papers on military history and trying to build up their name recognition in order to get contracts going forward. The way that this will work is that contractors will select one professional officer for every 250 men that they are commanding in the field. If the unit is under 250 men, then the company can either get an exception or they can just take one professional officer. That will be something that will be left up to the contractor's preference. The highest ranking professional who is selected will serve as the first officer of the unit, and he will directly advise the commanding officer, who will be a private citizen. Other people will be involved in training or advise subordinate commanders, the other professional officers I mean. And obviously there will be grades of officers, so you'll have lieutenants, majors, captains, colonels, generals, and all of that to select from depending on what you need. Since officers can turn down offers from contractors, contractors will sometimes need to do things to convince officers to serve with them. So they are permitted to offer monetary gifts as an incentive. However, they cannot offer non-monetary gifts, including stock options, so that all of this will be free from corruption and it will not stink of bribery. The commander of each contracted unit will be called the head commander, or HC, which I think is a pretty cool abbreviation, which really would have a nice ring to it. I think it would be something that CEOs could gravitate toward, going from being a CEO at home to an HC abroad. Anyway, the HC of each commanding unit will most likely be the CEO of the contracting company or another company officer chosen by the board. I suppose under extraordinary circumstances the board of directors could opt to select some private citizen who they really like for whatever reasons. If someone's a national hero, then maybe they could be selected. Maybe if it's some like former congressman or somebody who would be inspiring to somebody. The HC will organize the unit, run recruitment, and then he will command the unit in the field. The HC will have the full disciplinary authority of the United States government, and his orders will be carried out by the professionals under his command as well as the other men who have been contracted to duty. While he's in the field, the HC will answer directly to the President and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As I discussed in a previous video, the current military hierarchy and unit structure is outdated. It dates back to the era of Lee and Grant and really just doesn't make sense in today's world. One structure that always works and that has really revolutionized the way that our economy operates is the corporate hierarchy. So that is what we're going to use in the military. Below the HC and his first officer, there will be subordinates. All unit commanders, so if you are commanding, say, 4,000 men, if you're contracted to have 4,000 men and you decide to break that up into 4 teams of 1,000, then you would appoint 4 officers from your company. All of them must be people from the company holding the contract. These subordinates can be any kind of officer, whether we're talking about a vice president, a member of the board, a branch manager, a store manager, the CFO, a major stockholder. It just has to be someone who is an important member of the company, who has skin in the game. The first officers of subordinates will also be employees rather than professionals in most cases, but they don't necessarily have to be officers within the company. So this would be a great way to test out, say, promising employees who might not quite have any management experience. This is something I talked about in part 4. So that's how this would work. I've thought out all the details. If a company is sharing a contract with another company, then there should be a clear way to decide who decides what. So if we have more than one company holding a contract, command authority will be proportional to the amount of money spent. That's only fair. The HC must be from the main company, and that company will also choose the professional officer who will serve as the first officer, and then has to approve all of the other professional officers who are hired. All parties to the contract, however, have rights. They must get at least some subordinate command role unless they signed up as a subcontractor. If they're a subcontractor, then the terms of their service are determined exclusively by the contractor. And for the most part, subcontractors would be people who provide things like food. So I imagine that a lot of, say, fast food companies will sign up to work at the base camp but might not have an active role in fighting. So for instance, you could have a base camp run by Exxon and they have a troop presence, and then you have, say, Burger King there to provide food and other services like showers or whatever. You're probably thinking to yourself, what happens if you have multiple contractors in the same area? How would they get along with each other? It's actually pretty simple. Zones of control. This will avoid an overlap of command between legally empowered HCs. Each HC will claim a zone of control. And since each HC signs up with a contractor who is signed up with the government independently, they will all operate independently within their zone of control. So in theory, what would happen is that, say, if the US deployed troops to Mongolia to fight Russians or something like that, what would happen is that each HC would claim a zone of control, and then he would be in charge there. If one HC has to cross over or send some of his troops over into another HC zone, the HC who owns that zone will take command. However, if two HCs both leave their zones and they're in neutral ground, the HC who has the higher value contract will assume overall command. If there are any disputes, they will have a line to the Joint Chiefs, and then the Joint Chiefs will consult the President and make a decision as to who is in charge. But for the most part, these will all be professional businessmen, and they will see this as business. They'll be professional, and this should not be much of a problem, especially if people just respect their zone of control. One of the biggest problems in America today is that we don't hold our government accountable. If you look back at the Obama years, there were more abuses than you could fill 25 books with. Government overreach will be kept in check since the professional officers in the units will not be in command. If the professionals prove to be unacceptable, they can be fired by a majority vote of the board of the contracting company or by the CEO himself in the event that the business is a small one and it doesn't have a board of directors. What this does is prevent professional government soldiers from bullying their commanders and imposing the will of bureaucracy onto the people. Another problem that we see is corporate lack of accountability. This was especially true under Barack Obama, who played favorites with different corporations, rewarding his friends like Amazon while punishing other companies. At any rate, this will be a much more fair system. Companies who sign up and go overseas will be monitored by the professional officers who are serving as first officers. These professionals, both the first officers and the others, have a direct line to the Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon to report any abuse or incompetence on the part of the contractor. At the end of a contract, the HC will write a report and the first officer has to sign it for the government to give out any more contracts. Any contractor who is found to be in violation of the contract or who was just simply incompetent will be unable to get a contract for the following year and then will end up losing the right to serve rather than paying taxes. That's a pretty severe punishment. So, how will all of these businessmen be good at running military units, especially since most of them have never actually been in the military? It's quite simple. If you know anything about either business or military affairs, you know that they're basically identical in terms of the skills that you need. If you're good at one, if you become competent at one of these things, you'll also be nearly just as good at the other. There's a reason why businessmen read Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, David Petraeus, and others. It's because it informs businessmen and makes them better at what they do. I have personally read Sun Tzu 10 times, and I plan on reading him at least 10 more times. Military officers write books that link the two together. They write these books talking about how Napoleon applies to business, but for whatever reason, they have never applied business to military affairs, and that is a crime that the privatization of the military will correct, since obviously business skills will also enhance the military's ability to get things done. Let's look at some possible new war strategies that the business community can contribute. Here are 5 proven business strategies that could be applied to the battlefield and make our military better. Administrative management has 14 principles for managers. If commanders in the field took up those 14 principles, they would get more out of their troops. There is the X and Y theory of management. These are 2 different theories. One is hand-on, the other one is hand-off. So the one would give very precise instructions, and the other one would give sort of general directions. There's also contingency leadership, which is my personal favorite. It is where the manager is flexible and he just adapts to the situation. It depends on having a strong, well-informed manager. That's how I run my business. There is androgynous management. This one I put on mostly as a joke. Literally, it is that the leader should not have a clear gender, that, say, managers should be gender neutral. The only reason I put this on here is because this might be a way to get liberal companies to do their own service. So if they want to try androgynous management in the field, we'll probably have fewer liberals because this will be a flaming disaster. But, you know, I welcome them to try and prove me wrong, although I will be laughing the whole time. There's also objective-based management, which is just setting goals. And of course that works, but it's a little uninspired. So, those are the ways that businessmen can lead troops in the battle and do things that military officers would never think of. And this is why a privatized military would be more effective, because you'd have better generalship. You'd have more creative thinking. You would have troops that have more choice, that would have higher morals. All of this would happen in a private system. So let me know what you think about this plan. If you have any questions or whatever, I'm always happy to answer them. And I think that this is something that this country needs desperately, and that once we get it, we will finally be able to prevail over terrorists. This has been Remarkable Republican, bringing you the truth with a truth-flavored bias, signing out.